Good afternoon or morning or perhaps even evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for tuning in. This is Joe Altman broadcasting to you from Pittsburgh, PA. Glad to be here today. Again, thank you for tuning in. We're going to be talking about Essbase today, a little bit of history, a little bit of background, and a little bit of the future as well. I want to give you a little bit of the advertising speak about NRL. Thank you for tuning in. Many of you tune into our webinars frequently, but for those of you who may not know much about NRL, we are a company that has been around for over 20 years focusing on the Essbase space as well as over time Hyperion planning as well as BI, HFM and other closed tools. It's our specialty, but Essbase was our first love, and in fact I first experienced Essbase in the year 2000, and I've been teaching people about it for a number of years, so I'm excited to be here to do our webinar today. NRL is about relationships. We value the relationships with our clients and even people who are not our clients. That's why we do these webinars. So we're glad that you're here, even if you have not ever bought services from us before. So thank you for tuning in. Our goal is to educate the world, make it a smarter place than we found it. I'll just announce very quickly that we recently won again Oracle Analytics Partner of the Year for the fourth time. This is a reward that we are getting from Oracle, recognizing the work that we do in this space. A lot of it is in Essbase, and we have created some very innovative and exciting implementations of these products over the years and done some really great work with Essbase. And so if you're new to Essbase, tuning in today, I will hopefully get you excited about that product today. We've won a number of awards over the years. We work in all industries, and we've got a really great stable of consultants that we work with, and we've done lots and lots of implementations. So that's all about NRL. It's enough about us. Let's move on to our presentation. Let's talk about Essbase. So I'm going to give you a bit of background first, and then I'll show you a little bit about how Essbase works, some videos and demos, and then I'm going to tell you the news, the latest news about the future of Essbase. So, I love to wax poetic about Essbase. I get excited about it. All the opinions expressed here are mine, not necessarily those of Oracle or even NRL, but hopefully I will be giving you truthful information most of the time. So I want to talk to you about Essbase itself, what makes it exciting, and we're going to illustrate the business case really that led to Essbase's invention. Excuse me. So if you imagine that you are working, you're starting up a business, and it's a lemonade stand. So I need to keep track of what's going on with my lemonade stand. So maybe I'll turn to Microsoft Excel, and I want to track my revenue, my expenses. It's pretty simple at this point to figure out whether I'm making money or not. At my business, I'm handling at this point one dimension of my data. If I start tracking into another month, well, I've introduced a second dimension to my Excel spreadsheet, and now I'm going to track it for a second month, and I've got a two-dimensional array here. Pretty simple. No problems so far. Now, as businesses grow, they will begin to do more detailed tracking. They will begin to think about the business in more complex ways. So now I'm going to continue through time, but I'm also going to start doing more line items on my analysis. I'm going to actually track what my expenses are in different areas and not just in one bucket. Still pretty simple layout here, but let's see what happens as I continue to go out over time. I've gone into a new year now. So this is where Excel begins to make us have to get creative on how we deal with the additional dimensions. In this case, I've added an additional year dimension. I'm going to use the tabs to deal with that, so now I can go to different tabs as my third dimension and continue to track. Still not that big of a deal. As I continue to go through time, I'm going to actually change my mind about how I'm going to handle that third dimension. I've opened a new branch, and it kind of made me realize I needed to use the tabs now to deal with my two branches, and I'm going to rearrange the layout of the spreadsheet itself. I'm just going to have all my years now in the one spreadsheet, and so now I'm having to use multiple areas within that spreadsheet to handle my third dimension, and my fourth dimension is my tabs now. As I go through time, I'm going to maybe introduce new products into my line. So now each of the regions within each of my tabs is getting more complicated, and it's harder to see my data, and it's going to be hard to consolidate this as well. Now, let's say that I'm getting pretty sophisticated in my business, and I've decided I want to do some budgeting now and plan ahead. Well, how do I track that? Maybe I could do this. I could have one workbook to handle my actual revenue and expenses, and I can have a completely different workbook to handle my budget. And then I can have a third one that has formulas that looks into the other ones, and then we'll do the math to figure out what the differences is between them. So this is what we see often at businesses when they get into complex Excel models, but we're really starting to see how when I introduce this other dimension, is it the fifth dimension now, that we're getting beyond the ability of Excel to handle all these different dimensions. So now I'm going into multiple workbooks to manage that. And now I'm going to open up even more branches. So I did have enough trouble when I only had two, but now I've got even more, and I'm trying to handle budget and actual and all of that. So I've decided now I'm going to use the tabs to manage that. So I'll have one workbook to handle each one of my branches for all the different scenarios, but I still need an extra worksheet to pull all the numbers together and send references out there. So it's really beginning not to work for me. And now if I decide to divide my branches into different regions, I'm actually going to have multiple levels of consolidating workbooks with formulas going into one that is going even deeper into others. And this is not uncommon, again, and we see this at companies. And what's happening here is we are attempting to use Excel in a way that it's not really capable of handling, and it prevents us from doing a lot of things. What happens now if, in addition to budgeting, I want to do forecasting? What happens if I want to, have a first cut and a second cut and a third cut? How do I manage this within Excel itself? I'm going to add additional product lines or have departments. I don't even know how I can manage that within an Excel model itself and be able to keep track of all of that. And furthermore, how do I rearrange that? How do I really analyze that? How can I look at it in a different way if I would rather have something else on the rows and columns or something else on the tabs? How do I do that? It's a lot of manual labor even to go into what I've created now. If I want to look at it in a different way, I have a hard time doing that, and it's an additional manual labor, and maybe reassemble all of the data in a whole different set of workbooks that look differently. So that's not what I want, and that is the reason why Essbase was created. I like to call Essbase a magic filing cabinet. What I'd like you to imagine is you need the answer to a question. There's a weird profit number. It's down for a particular month, and you've got to go find out why. Now, you remember all the way back in the day when we had rooms full of filing cabinets and this whole bank of cabinets for a particular year's data and another bank for of cabinets for another year's data. Well, now we've narrowed it down to one. And when I walk up to that filing cabinet, it is labeled exactly what I need it to be. If it's the year that I need it to be, that's what it says. And I look at the drawers, and the labels on those drawers are what I need them to be. Maybe they are departments. I'm going to open that up for a particular department. I'm going to fumble through those folders that are inside of there, and they're labeled what I need them to be. Maybe they're the products, and I'll pull that out, and then I'll pull out the folder, and I'll look at the report that's inside of that folder. And right now I need it to be laid out with my accounts in the rows and my months in the columns. And I can get to the data that I need. Whatever I need those labels and rows and columns to be when I approach Essbase, that's what I can have them be. I take all the spreadsheets that I have created and I give them to the Essbase, and Essbase can give them back to me in whatever layout I need them to be at whatever summary level I need it to be. And that's why I call it magic, because I can bring whatever I need to the system and it gives me back what I need at that time. The way that it does this is it collects together three things. All that data that you have that you've collected that you need to organize. And you take that and you put it into a structure. We call that structure the outline. And that defines all of the different ways that I can total those numbers, add them together, maybe subtract something out, revenue minus expenses, profit, that sort of thing. And I create an entire hierarchy structure of taking that raw data and rolling it up into more meaningful totals and consolidated amounts. And then I can also go in and create additional formulas for KPIs or even large files to just go through and run a whole bunch of calculations across the board on a lot of my data and store those calculated amounts within the system so I can just ask for them by name and not have to go make formulas in Excel or something to derive data from the existing data. Now, when Essbase came out a long time ago, it was marketed as a business software. It was actually sold to businesses with the idea that you don't even need to bring IT into the mix here. We can just give it to you, give it to the controller or the CFO. You just install it here under your desk. We won't even have to worry about IT. We'll connect all of your people together into it, and you can manage it yourself. Now, this is the route to why I continue to advocate for Essbase as a whole, the vision for Essbase and the building out of those hierarchical structures and applications to be owned by the business, even though at this point it doesn't make any sense for us for security or for lots and lots of reasons that the server itself wouldn't be managed by IT. We've got to have IT involved now, and we need them to do the important IT stuff. But as far as running Essbase itself, it's really for business users and to understand it. Now, just to give you a little idea of how impactful Essbase was when it came out, it was back in 2005, so it was a long time ago, but Information Age magazine listed Essbase as one of the top 10 technology innovations of the past decade at that time. So that's pretty interesting, but if you look at these other things that were also labeled like top 10 innovations, we're looking at, it says Netscape. What that really is the web, the World Wide Web, kind of a big deal. If you look at BlackBerry there, what that really means is smartphones, big deal. Google, of course, obviously a big deal. Virtualizing things, voice over IP, Linux, that free operating system, XML Pentium processor, ADSL, which is basically broadband internet to the home. These are all really big deals, and Essbase was one of the technologies also named as a big deal such as this. So that's one of the reasons that I get excited when I talk about Essbase and try to educate people about it. It really is a big deal, and it's got a great history, and I like to get people turned on to it. Here's a quick example of a design that we might do to look at sales analytics. So I'm going to decide certain kinds of dimensions, actual forecast budget. You remember our lemonade stand had to deal with that as well. I got to divide that data out over time. I need to measure different things. I've got different markets that I work in, and I'm selling different products. So if I want to do this analysis, how do I get my data back? Well, if I want to get sales data, I will just pick one member from each one of these dimensions that we've defined, and that will give me one number, one piece of data. The actual sales in the third quarter for my New York market for my under-counter dishwashers. Now, if I want to put something else on the screen, also the East, I can select that as well, and I can have two numbers on the screen, and I'm beginning to get a grid. All dishwashers as well, and that I can have dishwashers down the side and my markets across the rows, and I'll be able to pull all the different data points that I need. This is probably better understood if you watch it happen. So I'm just going to show you quick. This is a vendor analysis. It's pretty cool of how we can do quick analysis. I'm going to do clear sheets there so I can prove there's nothing up my sleeve. I'm starting from nothing. This is something I want to do. I'm going to look at I want to buy some new machines, and I'm going to go do some research on where I've gotten them in the past. So here we are, P10001. I've bought 2,043 of those over time because I focused on quantity. Now, I'm going to look at the history. Oh, I've got too much data here, so I'm going to quickly turn on what we call suppression. So all these intersections with no data, they're just going to go away. Now I want to look at both of these years. You see I pivot them into the column so I can have them laid out that way. Now I'm going to focus on my vendors. I'm going to zoom into the bottom. I've bought from a few different places over the years. But now that I've zoomed in and figured out who I've bought from in the past using quantity, I'm going to change that account. I'm going to include some additional things. Zoom out and zoom back in again. And now I've gotten purchase amount, quantity, purchase price, and I've pivoted them into the columns. I'd rather have them kind of more to the bottom, so I'm going to change those around a little bit. So now I've got my years grouped together, and the accounts are all in the same place for each year. Now I can do formatting here. These are dollar amounts, so I'm just going to grab all of these, and I can start to get a feel for what this report's going to look like. I don't really need that stuff right there. It's totals over time. So I've got 17 and 18 now, and some dollar amounts, how many I bought and at what price. So I can do a little bit of analysis here. This is cool. I use this conditional formatting. It just kind of throws some colors on there based on the content of the data. This is just Excel functionality, but it helps me come in here and I can go, oh, okay, well, I have bought from several companies, but it looks to me like I've gotten the best prices from Beatrix and from Costa. So now if I'm going to go buy some new P10001s, those are probably the companies that I'm going to want to go and approach for my next purchase. So that's just a quick example of how I can dive into Essbase through the Excel interface, the plugin here called SmartView, and do analysis and figure out important things that exist there in the data, and I just need to ask for it. Now, let's talk about that SmartView interface a little bit. That's one of the things that's the great differentiator for Essbase. People, finance people, lots of people love to work in Excel. We can leave them in that interface. They can bring in all kinds of data from other spreadsheets and integrate it together with the Essbase data. I can work with hierarchies that I've created that are deep in some areas and not so deep in other areas. You know, that's hard to manage in a lot of tools, including Excel. When I'm interfaced with Essbase, that's really, really easy. I can do reports in all kinds of layouts, including some asymmetric ones that are pretty cool. I've got all those powerful calculations out there on the server that I can define in one place, and then I can just ask for them by name. And I don't have to be incredibly technical to be able to deal with that. And I can restrict the access to data that people have so that they're not getting into departments that aren't theirs and that kind of thing. Let's cover a little bit of the basics about Essbase. What I want to show you here is some things in the latest version of Essbase, which is out there in the cloud as part of Oracle Analytics Cloud. This is what it looks like. It's got a very similar look and feel to other Oracle Cloud products. If you're familiar with Essbase at all, you'll recognize a lot of these words and labels on things, outlines and scripts and security files and things like that. So this is just a different way to get at that. In terms of building and defining those dimensions and creating these Essbase multi-dimensional layouts, I'm actually given this tool called the Cube Designer. It's another thing that lives in Excel, and it allows me to define all of my dimensions and the hierarchies and the roll-ups within Excel, and then I just give those up to the Cloud Essbase instance to go create those clouds. This is what that looks like within Cube Designer. You can see I've got all these tabs across the bottom. One of them is going to define the parameters of the application itself. The other is going to define the settings. And then you can see I've got dimensional, one tab per dimension, account, period, year. This one is for products and services, and I can define at each level of my hierarchy what I find at that level and some general dimensional settings here at the top. I define the entire Essbase cube with this workbook, and then I do this load data, build cube menu item to go and create that out in Essbase. And then if I need to change it, I just modify the workbook here and resubmit it. It's a completely different way to manage and be an administrator over Essbase cubes than it was in the past. Now that's not the only way to build dimensions. There are others. Application Workbook is a good one, and even if I don't have an application workbook for an existing application, I can go out to the cloud and I can hit that application and say download that to Excel, and it will create the application workbook that defines itself completely. And then I can do a migration that way, or I can just grab something that I don't have an application workbook for and modify it that way. So it will just give me the workbook that defines itself, which I think is really great. I can also just go right through the web interface and add members or formulas or whatever I need to do, very similar to what we used to do in the old Essbase administration tool, except this is going through the cloud interface, and I can just work with the outline directly, as well as load rules, which are bulk uploads of something that I might pull out of a file or a data source, like a relational repository, and I can build those dimensions and define them that way as well. A similar thing for loading data. My application workbook can contain data for the cube as well. I can press the button and just send data into the database from that Smart View interface that we were looking at. Just when I can just type in a number to change it and send it in if I have security and I'm allowed to do that. I can also have load rules as well as multiple other ways to integrate the tool in, including a cloud-based REST API, command line interface. If you're familiar with Maxell, that tool is still available. And then an integration tool such as OneCloud or something like that can just stream data from one place to the other and leverage that sort of capability as well. Now we said there were dimensions in a hierarchical structure, and we said there was data, and then also the calculation. So this is where I can go in and enrich and enhance that data and create calculations and things that are going to derive data from the data that I've loaded up. So maybe I'm going to calculate ratios or percent of revenue or that sort of thing. I can go through and write a calculation, stick a formula right on one of my members in the outline, and just give it a name and give it a formula, or I can create something that's going to run through the entire database and create calculations and store those numbers back in. That's a very powerful way to do an allocation and create a lot of derived data metrics and KPIs from existing data. Multiple ways to do that as well. Again, the web interface or the workbook application that can do that. So let's talk a little bit about when you go to use Essbase and you would like to have some ideas about how to do design. What are some good ideas for when I'm going to be creating Essbase applications? There are a lot of use cases for this, such as you just have way too many Excel spreadsheets. Excel is great. You like how it works, but you want to be able to have some kind of better way to organize that data and not have all these models and interdependent spreadsheets out there. Another is they still want PDF reports. I need to standardize my calculations. I have a drill through requirement. And my analysis and reporting is about numbers. Now you see that's one here that's about detailed employee records, and that might be names and addresses and things like that. That's actually not a strong use case for Essbase. So we're not going to say it's the answer to everything. There's a lot of text involved and deep details and phone numbers, like lots of data like that. Then we'll use a different tool for that. But if it's numbers and I can evaluate those numbers and analyze those, I need to get answers from those, that's where Essbase comes in strongly. So let's look at the idea of these dimensions. So we start at the bottom and look at all the different places where we have granular data at the lowest level. And then we think about how we can organize those. Now, if I'm going to have a product dimension and I want to organize my products into different levels, maybe I do have. So I start at the SKU level at the bottom. Do I have groupings of SKUs? That's great. Do those groups join into a family and categories so they get ever more general? But one thing to keep in mind is that all of those ideas for organizing those are only thinking about the products. So I'm not worried at that point of whether they're sold by a particular department or whether they're, if I'm thinking about a department in my organization, I'm not worried if it's a department that generates revenue or a department that's only expenses. I don't want to think about a department or a cost center in terms of accounting ideas. Just think about the organization and group my cost centers up into departments, up into divisions, up into organizations, and try to have really clean division between the different dimensions so that the roll-ups are really clean and each dimension can do its job and only its job, because the hierarchy is concentrated only on the concept that that dimension is built around. I'm only thinking about products when I roll up products. Okay, so that's great. What kinds of questions do I need to answer with my dimensions? So this is going to help me define what the roll-ups need to be, how do I need to organize that, and how detailed do I need to get, like how far down do I need to gather that data and load it up. Looking at existing reports is a great way to think about your dimensions and work backwards from what you need to produce to what it takes to produce that. So I'm looking at rows and columns and labels and headers, kind of pulling out those ideas, and each one of those is likely to be represented by a dimension in the Essbase. All the subtotals that I might need, I want those to be represented as roll-ups or formulas on the Essbase side. I don't want to roll those custom within any Excel spreadsheet. Anything that I'm having to do repeatedly or more than once ever in my analysis or my reporting, I want to have the server doing that and give it a name and give it a formula or a hierarchy element so that I don't have to roll that myself within Excel. If there are different ways that I want to group things together, we have ideas called alternate roll-ups and other concepts. If my hierarchy changes frequently, I would need to think differently about whether I want to have multiple dimensions there, or how I'm going to build that out. And then some of my dimensions I'll need to worry about security. That could be department, it could be account. Probably not going to worry too much about time and things like that. If you have access to stuff, you can get access to any range of time if you want. So some areas will need security and some areas will not. So let's talk about different types of Essbase cubes. So actually multiple types of cubes for different purposes within Essbase. The old original was called BSO, block storage option. And this is classic Essbase as it was invented. It's really good at calculating data. I can create very complex calc scripts so that I can pour through that data and kind of open up one little area of the database, do a calculation, set it aside, open up the next one, do the calculation, set it aside, etc., etc., etc. This is really powerful, and if it were scalable, it would really be the only thing that we ever needed, but it didn't scale quite as well as businesses got to want to analyze larger and larger data sets. We invented ASO, aggregate storage option. This is really good at taking lots and lots and lots of data and rolling it up. It's not as good at doing those calculations that we were talking about. I can do formulas, but largely they're going to be fairly simple and not demanding, and I'm not going to be able to really do a lot of batch calculations to go through and derive a whole bunch of stuff after data has been loaded. A lot of time are going to be dependent on formulas that are on the members and calculating on the fly when I pull the data. So this is really good for large cubes, but what we really needed was a combination of those, and that's what hybrid is. And this is only a few years old, but this is really the sweet spot for Essbase. If you've got a lot of data and you need to do some complex calculations, you get the best of both worlds with hybrid. So, here's a quick look at that. I can write back to any one of these, but with ASO I can only write back at the very bottom of the hierarchies. BSO and hybrid are the engines that you're going to use when you really need to do complex calculations. Now, hybrid is actually the default within Oracle Analytics Cloud, and I actually want to break out of this presentation for just a second and give you a look at what it looks like out there on the web. So this is a live demo, so fun stuff. This is always the best way to do things, is doing things completely live. So I just wanted to show you a hybrid cube real quick. This is, if you're familiar with Sample Basic from back in the day, this has always been around as the general cube that is always used when you're talking through functionality. Comes with Essbase, but they've also got this new one called Sample Dynamic, which is a hybrid cube, so you can get a look at how that works. Let's just have a look real quick at the outline itself, and I'll show you how hybrid works. Most of the time when you build a cube, you're going to have different dimensions, and some of them are dense, which means I'm expecting to have a lot of data across the board for each one of the members in there. And when I think about the spreadsheet, I'm most likely to have that on my spreadsheet. You have multiple members on that. So accounts and months or periods are frequently called dense because I can have lots and lots of accounts on my rows and a whole bunch of months across the columns, and it just makes sense to group those. So we've put those into what we call dense dimensions, but then we also have sparse ones as well. Now, those of you that are familiar with BSO will know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I'll just show you right here. These are the roll-up levels inside of this dimension, and I have them flagged as dynamic. Now, normally in an Essbase cube, if we had looked at that other sample basic, these upper-level members would be tagged also as store. So when I loaded all that data, and I would go to retrieve it out of Essbase, if I wanted to do it at a high level, I wouldn't get anything until I had gone through and run what we call an aggregation. So it would go through and pre-calculate all the numbers at the highest level. So that includes product and market. So these are the different areas where I sell things. I would have to calculate all the different combinations ahead of time and store them in the database so that I could retrieve them really, really quickly. But what I'm doing here is I'm actually telling the hybrid engine, don't pre-calculate those, just when I ask for it, give it to me now, calculate it on the fly. This was really, really slow back in the BSO days, but with the hybrid engine, and we're getting the best of both worlds, we're able to configure the dimensions this way, which is a very ASO type thing, but run very complex calculations and calc scripts like we could in BSO and get both. So let's just do a real quick, this isn't going to be the best analytic experience, but I can show you, we actually can do some online web interface and look at the data. So here we go, all these numbers got rolled up in real time just now. The hybrid engine is really quick that way. I can just do some options here, zoom in on colas, do a keep only because I only care about colas right now. And then I only care about February, so I can do a keep only there, and I'm not worried. Let's see, if I zoom out, what sorts of measures can I care about? Let's just look at profit and keep only. Make sure that I'm dealing with my actuals. Keep only. So there we go, pivot this. Right, so all of this is happening, all the roll-ups in real time. So that's the hybrid engine in action. Of course, this database isn't very big, but we're seeing really great results in the OAC version of Essbase with the fully functional hybrid engine doing really well with cubes, and that's why it's the default for OAC type cubes when you create them. They're going to be hybrid unless you go and do something to make them something else. So it works really well, even if this outline were bigger and we had even more members that we were rolling up dynamically, it would still work really well. So let's see. We will resume presentation. All right. So hopefully that all worked just fine. Now, let's talk about that outline because we keep mentioning it. The thing about it is it's hard to overemphasize how important it is to get the correct outline layout. That includes which dimensions am I going to have in my model, as well as what are the roll-ups that I'm creating within each one of those dimensions. So I need to think about how I do that and think about how that data is stored. I've got kind of a lot more to think about in terms of BSO, which ones am I going to allow to be dynamic versus not. The hybrid engine allows me to mark entire dimensions dynamic, and they work just fine. There's several different ways that I can configure dimensions in ASO as well, depending on whether I'm going to have alternate roll-ups or not. But what I want to do with my outline as much as possible is have all of the calculations that I need to be done occur within the server and occur really quickly within the server. So I need to just make sure that my hierarchies and my roll-ups, whatever the dimension, they're meaningful. And if I need to roll things up in multiple ways, I'm very careful thinking through what the different ways of organizing those, and I can have multiple ways to roll those up through alternate hierarchies. So here we are with kind of the decision on how to make calculations. I like to do member formulas whenever I can, if I just really quickly can calculate data that's related to the data that I'm already looking at on the screen, or as we say within that block, do a quick member formula. There's some kinds of calculations that I want to do as a calc script, and that's why I'm excited about the hybrid engine, is because even though I have a large data set, I can go through and do allocations or complex types of script type, full batch calculations in that engine as well, and store those back into the database, those results, and then query them, and they come back really quickly as well. So a lot of different ways I can interface with Essbase, more than ever, really. The SmartView tool that we looked at, there's a great data visualization tool, which is a cloud service, or you can install it on your desktop, that I can interface with Essbase and interact with it in a very visual way. That's what it looks like here. This bottom one, giving you just the ability to drag in new measures. It's going to suggest to you different ways to look at it. What is this chart format that you might want to use to look at that layout there, and then we've got also a narrative reporting tool that's going to allow you to marry both commentary, paragraphs of text, together with the grids of data that you're pulling out of Essbase. You can actually share out responsibility for that tool. Send out the different reports and let people type in their analyses, their variance explanations, or whatever it may be, and send that back, and it's all gathered up with the cloud service and assembled into a single document there. We've had a financial reporting tool for a long time. We can use that, as well as dashboards. OAC has got business intelligence built in there, married together with Essbase. We can do that. There are other also third-party tools that can interact with this data, Tableau and things like that. And then I've got to consider the kind of user that is interfacing. Are they technical? Do they just want to push the button? A lot of times I could just give them a predefined template in SmartView, and all they have to do is click the button, type in their password, and the new data comes in. Simply stated, when we look at Essbase design, there's an art to it, and you can't really say there's one way to do anything. You have to bring in experience and expertise and make good choices, but there's no exact right choices. And I want to remind you to begin with the end in mind. That means gathering up the reports or imagining and whiteboarding the reports that I need to get out of the system. Work backwards from there. Figure out what the dimensions and rollups are from there, and then design the cube around that. So that's a lot about Essbase history and a quick look at it out there in the cloud. Well, let's talk about what's new. Let's talk about some news that's pretty recent about Essbase itself. First, there's a change in Oracle Analytics in general. So let's set Essbase aside for just a moment, and we will talk about the other products, the BI and the data visualization that we referred to. Those are now going to be called Oracle Analytics. I can install them on site, so I can get an on-prem version of that. I can put it in my data center, and that's going to be called Oracle Analytics Server. So I own it, I manage it. I can also still consume it as a cloud service. If it's hosted out there for me, that's going to be called Oracle Analytics Cloud, same as it is now. And there's a couple of levels of service there, professional and enterprise, so the licensing is different on those, which we can get into at another time. And then there's also a data set. Now this isn't released yet, but I can get specialized analytics coupled with the cloud ERP and other applications out there within the Fusion environment from Oracle and get pre-built schemas and analytics for that, and that's going to be called Oracle Analytics for Applications. So now let's talk about the future of Essbase. So here's the news. After a long battle with record scratch. What? Okay, so here's what it is. After a long battle with some things that yanked Essbase back and forth for a while, some decisions about where it was going to live within the structure, we're considering Essbase a database again. So there was a while that it was more thought of as a BI tool, but over time we have come back to the thinking that Essbase is a database. So for now it's going to live within the database group within the Oracle product stack. So I'm going to be closer to, Oracle is a database company from the beginning. So it's more in line with that, and with that it's actually going to get a whole new version number as well. It is not going to be part of Oracle Analytics going forward. It's going to be its own separate thing, but it will continue. Essbase is going to continue to exist, and I actually really like this because we're going to get Essbase. The numbering is going to change. It was the last version on-prem was version 11.1 XXXX, and then the version living behind Oracle Analytics Cloud was called 12C. But the databases and the BI apps are on a different numbering scheme. So now we're going to get Essbase 19. It's going to be Essbase 19C, and it's going to come out in a couple of flavors. One is it's going to be hosted on machines out in the cloud. So it's not really a cloud service, but it will be out there on machines that are owned by, run by Oracle, and we'll install Essbase onto those, and it'll be hosted out there. Or I can do the same as I was doing with Oracle Analytics Server. I can get a version and install it within my data center on my own hardware. So when they know what hardware it's going to run on, it's easier to build that system. It's easier to deploy it. So the cloud version is going to come out sooner, and the on-prem version will be out a little bit later on, and then there'll be an out-of-place upgrade from wherever you are on Essbase now onto one of these, and then it's going to be full steam ahead with Essbase as a database and back in that role that we've been familiar with it until the last couple of years, where it is a standalone thing and we can leverage it as an engine and interface it with all sorts of the other tools and plug it in and plug it out of our analytics and load up all the data that we need. And all the interfaces and everything is going to be very similar to what we're seeing with the cloud interface with OAC today. Now, all of this is looking forward. We have the news from Oracle, what their plans are. It's always what we call safe harbor. It may or may not happen exactly as we're saying it, but at this point, we're pretty confident it's going to happen at all. The timing will perhaps change over time. We will find out when we get there. So one of the things going on with 19C is we're leveraging all the innovations that came from the OAC, the time that Essbase was living within OAC, that completely enhanced functional hybrid engine, web interface, some more interesting developments with SmartView. The way that we're managing security and connections have been modified data sources in really great ways out there in OAC to add more flexibility to the way I create filters, security, the way that I get at data, the way that I do drill through. All of those have been redesigned, revolutionized in the OAC Essbase, and we're going to be getting that in our 19C, both cloud and on-prem, and against Essbase standing alone. There are some things that we know from old Essbase that are going away or have gone away, and here's the list of them. So varying attributes, those were rolled out several years ago, and I was really excited about it. They didn't really complete that implementation. They didn't give me a way to automate it, so not a lot of people used it, so they're taking it out. Currency conversion, this was a built-in thing that really nobody used. When you created a cube, you could create it as a currency cube, but nobody really did that. Everybody's always rolled their own. So there was better ways that people had figured out to do that. So that functionality is actually removed now since nobody was using it. EAS was the old administration tool. That is going away. That we are not going to be able to use EAS, the admin tool, to do work. So that's a really good tool. The Jet UI is the latest version of the web interface for how to administer Essbase, and it's getting better. It's not feature parity with EAS just yet, but it is a lot better than the previous version of it, so we're getting there. Essbase Studio is not part of the stack going forward, and all databases are going to be Unicode now rather than having a choice, and most people's old cubes are going to be non-Unicode, but we just convert them over, and they're fine going forward. About the money, Oracle is communicating that it should be about the same to go with Essbase out there on the cloud, installed out there, even though it's not fully managed by them, but just going out there and having them host it for us should be about the same, maybe a little bit less. So we'll see when all the announcements come out about how that works, but the expectation is it should be round about the same. So let's just summarize a couple of things before we take a break from one another today. Essbase itself, it's a fantastic analytical engine. It does one thing, it does it really well. It takes numbers, organizes them, and allows you to do really powerful slice and dice analytics. It's called multidimensional analysis. You can take a number of approaches to developing your Essbase applications, but going forward, the standard way to do that will be, once you have 19C, you'll create a hybrid cube. You'll add in all the dimensions and members that you need. You'll set most of the parent members to be dynamically calced, and most of the time there won't be a whole lot of tuning that you'll have to do, because the engine is giving you both the quick aggregations and the powerful calculation engine that it's known for. We can work with security at whatever level that you need, cross-dimensional security, to allow people to see certain accounts when they're looking at one department, but other accounts when they're looking at a different department. It's more flexible than you may be familiar with if you've worked with Hyperion planning before. There's some cool stuff on sandboxing and pulling some data off and playing around with it, but I'm not messing with other people. and then when I'm happy with it, I can submit it back into the main model, or I might just ditch it because I didn't really like where it was going, and I'm just going to discard it without affecting anybody else. So that's a really cool way um, to manage your data and work with it. That's only going to be available in OAC Essbase or the future 19C. We love that we can live in Excel while we're working with Essbase. I like the new Cube Designer workbook. I can just look in there and see everything I need to know about that cube. It's completely defined in there. Lots of options for doing reporting and getting at it. Lots of different ways to do calculations, and I can get at it even if I'm not technical. So bottom line here is everybody, I hope, will be excited about the new version coming out. Essbase has come a long way. Way back in the day when it first came out, there's just a few floppy disks. You'd pop it in that machine and you'd hit next a few times and you were good to go. Over time, it became more powerful, more of an enterprise tool. System 7 introduced the ASO engine. System 9 added together all of the other EPM components into kind of one place, planning and HFM and all of those into this one stack with shared services. We went farther and farther. OBI is introduced into the fold. We're getting rid of some of the old tools that we would use to interface with it. And then eventually it moved into Oracle Analytics Cloud. It has spent a couple of years there, done some great innovations, and now we've extracted it back out of Oracle Analytics Cloud, and it's going to be its own thing again. And we get to just go and work with Essbase as Essbase. And so that's something that I'm personally pretty jazzed about, and I hope that you can see the great potential there for Essbase again, as it's just treated as its own thing, it's its own product, and the team there can concentrate on making Essbase as great as it can be. So let me tell you a little bit about NRL's other educational things as we reach the end of our content here. We love to create videos. We call it Play It Forward. You can go do a search with lots and lots of videos. There's an initiative basically to do videos about everything within the Essbase technical reference. So you can go and get a quick 3-minute, 5-minute video about a question that you have or how to use a particular function within Essbase. So go, it's epm.bi/videos. Go consume those. So it's a great way to get little tidbits about how to use Essbase better. We have published a lot of books over time. So OAC is our latest one, but you can see we've got cloud planning, we've got cloud reporting, administration, and of course our classic books, books about the old on-prem solutions as well. Got some additional webcasts coming on over the next few weeks. What is planning? And then hybrid coming to the cloud. If you want to learn more about hybrid, that's a good chance to do that. Profitability and cost management, strategic modeling, which is built into the planning product now. That's that old Hyperion strategic finance that's been integrated into planning. And then account reconciliation, which is another tool that allows you to do your account reconciliation and make sure that the number 7 here equals the number 7 in the subledger equals the number 7 in the GL. And of course, lots and lots of other functionality within there that you can learn about at that webinar. And that brings us to the end of the webcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope it has been educational. Whether you were first learning about Essbase for the first time, or you knew all about it and you were just waiting for the news. So I appreciate your patience for coming in and sitting through all of that education about the background on Essbase and getting to the future bit, which is the exciting part for you. If you have questions, and just submit those in, and what we're going to do is gather up any of your questions and get you an email response to that. Don't have the ability to handle the questions in real time today, so just submit those into the question box, and we'll get answers to you for those. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. I'm excited to give you this information, and also that we've come in slightly below time. So until next time, signing off, this is Joe Altman from Pittsburgh, PA. I'll see you next time.